the mission and vision of the American Islamic College, to me, pretty much now synonymous with the work. I believe in the transformative power of education, and not just education that is informative, but in education that is transformative, education that really changes how we live. But I think that the Muslims of America need a place that they can come as a Muslim space. This is their space. It belongs to them.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah. Wa alaikum assalam. You were apologizing. Please continue.
Yeah, no, I was apologizing for the glitches tonight. You know, there are several people on the team who make this possible, and I just want to thank all of them for all of the support, all the people who are working behind the scenes to make it possible for us to have this conversation, Mahan, and for us to bring guests in, and for us to think about the excellent points and questions that come in, and of course we all have families and we all have frail bodies, and so some members of our team are attending to sick family members, and we want to just keep them all in our prayers, and indeed all the suffering people in the world who are who don't have the luxury of reading Qur'an in a safe space, and reading Qur'an having been able to break their fast, and so what a privilege it is for us. And I can only hope and pray that somehow, some way, what we do here tonight has some kind of an influence, that there are holy vibrations or holy sparks or holy some kind of positive energy that can go out into the ether and be a source of comfort and solace and protection for those people who are living in such dire circumstances and in such pain. And I hope and pray that God will inspire us and strengthen us to find ways to be conduits of mercy and protection and sustenance and provision for those people. Inshallah.
Ameen. Ameen.
Yeah. I was just talking with Dr. Mahan before we came on, and this month of Ramadan is indeed first and foremost the month of the gifting of the Qur'an. We've talked about that, and it's one of the reasons why we've centered the Qur'an in these Ramadan Unscripted podcasts, because the gifting of the Qur'an to humankind is for us such a monumental event, such a world-changing, life-changing event. And the month of Ramadan is the month in which we really celebrate that. We celebrate God's benevolence and generosity by responding with gratitude and with attention, and trying to live a more theocentric life, trying to put God back in the middle. And so and the month of Ramadan is also a month of community. I was telling Dr. Mahan that a few of us from the American Islamic College had the great blessing of being with the community, the Chicago community from Montenegro originally. And so this Montenegrin mosque community was so lovely, and their prayers and everything was just so beautiful and so touching. We really were so profoundly touched by that. So it's a month of community, and it's obviously a month of fasting, not just food and drink, but fasting from our wicked ways, fasting from our impatience, and fasting from our anger, and fasting from being an obstacle to ourselves and to other people. And it's also a month of giving. This is a month when Muslims give. It's believed that the charity that is given in Ramadan is has a much greater blessing and reward for the recipient as well as for the giver during the month of Ramadan. And so I would be remiss, as the steward of the American Islamic College, I would be remiss in asking our friends and allies and conversation partners who have appreciated this Ramadan Unscripted or have benefited in some way to please consider giving to the American Islamic College. Higher education is, especially now, when universities are being controlled by political entities, when free speech is being crippled. When we teach students, of course, to think critically, and the moment they do that, then we call the police in and have them arrested and hauled off campus. This is a moment when universities, higher education is really in crisis, and yet it is a moment when we need critical thinkers more than ever before. We see how the information that is coming to us even now through the corporate news is so controlled and so laced with propaganda and so filled with double standards. And so we need to have people who are able to think critically and to see through the fog, and really analyze things, come to see them for what they really are, and then to make decisions based upon reality as opposed to perception. And in this time of artificial intelligence, of course, it's harder and harder to know truth from deception, from fiction. And so, this is such a critical time, and we need to have our minds open and our eyes open, and we need to be able to see the challenges that we're facing and to confront them with all of our intellectual power and all of our spiritual power and all of our attention. And I feel like so much of our mind right now is just being befuddled by all of this imagery and manipulation and propaganda. And I don't know how you feel about that, Dr. Mahan, but I know that you could have been an engineer, and you could have had a very different career before you decided to go back to school and become a scholar. So tell me, like, how do you feel about the importance of education as someone who's given his life to this?
I am an engineer. I ended up becoming an engineer, but really, I think I wanted to ask bigger questions, not just building bridges, but I wanted to think about where we're going and what are we connecting. And so those are higher order questions, and I'm grateful for the opportunity that I had to come and study. When you're growing up where I come from, I'm originally from Pakistan. Really, medicine or engineering are the two careers that you're pointed towards, unless you have family wealth and business or legacy. And my father was in the Air Force, so military was an option. But I did engineering because by elimination, I didn't want to do medicine, and I didn't really think beyond that. But when I had the opportunity to come here, and these are not things of our own doing. I mean, these are things that Allah bestows. I didn't choose where I was born, and I didn't pick all the opportunities that came my way. These are doors that open up, and we're all accountable and responsible. But when I did come here to study, I saw that different worlds were possible, and I wanted to do other things. So I just switched and I studied Islam. It was a circuitous route. I was working as an engineer, but I went to the seminary and got a master's in an evening program at Hartford Seminary, which is now the Hartford International University for Religion and Peace. And then, did PhD in religion, focusing on Islam. And that's what my career became. But I also wonder, it becomes a career path, but really what motivated all this was in some ways to live out a life of purpose. And you tend to get lost in the the steps you need to take to maintain a career. And at some point you wonder, is this just another career now than any other one, or are we able to make a difference? So there's always that introspection and the struggle that continues. But alhamdulillah, here we are. Yeah. And speaking, I'm from Pakistan. I just want to say one thing. We talk about the wars that are taking place, and our focus has been on Gaza, and in some ways, Israel that has been perpetrating this horrific violence, and now it's embroiled in another war. But what I'm thinking of, and I've been following that war. But I'm from Pakistan, and today Pakistan has struck in Afghanistan. There's a war that's between two Islamic countries, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan and the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. And from initial reports, a hospital has been hit. It's a facility for rehabilitation, and 400 people have been killed and over 200 injured. It's a horrific, absolutely horrific. And so, I'm speechless, deeply shocked and saddened, and my heart goes out to the people who are on the receiving end of these innocent people. And in this case, they are Afghan brothers and sisters. And Pakistan, has more power, and so it has great responsibility. I mean, the great geopolitical games, I think, being played right now on the global stage, and there's a fog of war, and I don't really know what's happening, but all I know is that this is wrong, and we don't want to see this happen.
Yes,
it's Ramadan.
Yeah, no, it's at any time, though, even it's such a violation of the sacred month. And I'm sorry, I was listening to you, but my camera, I think, ran out of battery, and so it switched back to the laptop, and so I had to adjust that while you were speaking. But the Ramadan is a sacred season, and this violence is such a violation of the sacred nature of Ramadan, which is the month of God's benevolence toward humankind. We celebrate the gifting of the Qur'an. We celebrate prayer and community and charity, and for us to witness such terrible violence, even Muslim on Muslim violence, it is such a violation of the spirit of what Ramadan is. But coming back to education, I think that if there is hope for humankind, for me, it's education. Because I feel like education really is the light that can dispel this darkness. And for us, of course, faith-based education can even be a more powerful force. We read in the Qur'an over and over again about how God sends the prophets in order to extract people out of their darknesses and bring them into light. And this, to me, is so core to what it means to be an educator, to bring people out of ignorance. Well, first ourselves, right? To be constantly examining the ignorance that exists within ourselves, but also within our students and among our colleagues, to be, as the Quran says, challenging each other with the truth and reminding each other in patience and seeking the truth together, seeking something better together. And so if I had to invest in something right now, it would be education, and not just in the American Islamic College or our cousin institution, our sister institution, Zaytuna, out on the West Coast, but all real education, I think, is worthy of support right now, because this is really where we're going to develop the appreciation for diversity and the ability to see beyond the barbarism and depravity that's being presented to us. And so what do you think about beginning tonight with Al-Hujurat and entering into the question of human diversity?
Yes, take us there.
Okay, so this is the 49th surah, and of course, because we're not doing this every night, we have big blocks of Quran to work with during these nights. But one of the passages that occurs within these blocks that we have for tonight, and is tonight the 27th or the 28th, this evening of Ramadan?
I have it as the 28th night.
28th night of Ramadan. So that means we really have only one Ramadan Unscripted left for this Ramadan. And
on the 30th night. Yeah.
And we would be remiss not to celebrate this particular verse. This is the 49th verse. This is Surah 49 Al-Hujurat, and it's the 13th. It's the 13th ayah. Do you want to say anything about the surah before we plunge in, Mahan?
I do, but let's do the
Okay.
Let's get into the text, and then maybe we'll come back to context a little bit more.
So in the ayah 13, we read Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ya ayyuhan nas, meaning really, this isn't like, oh, you who believe. It's not addressing the Muslims or the believers or the Jews or the Christians. This is addressing all humankind here. O people, O humankind, surely we have created you from a pair, like a single pair, from a male and a female. And we have made you into shu'uban, we've made you into peoples and qaba'il and tribes, in order that you might come to know one another. Surely the most noble or the most honorable of you in God's sight is the most God conscious of you. And surely God is all knowing and expertly acquainted with all things. So there seems to be diversity seems to be not something that is threatening here in the Quran. It seems to be part of the divine plan. The differences, these binaries, right? Male and female. And we know that these are almost like archetypal binaries, that we're all kind of on a spectrum, and nations and tribes. And we know too, with our bloodlines are often much more mixed than the propagandists would want us to believe. But still, these ideas, these ideas of difference, nations and tribes and male and female, that we were created different on purpose so that we might come to know one another. What do you think that? I often wonder what this means. I don't have an answer, so I'm asking, how do you read that?
We do have different cultures, and these are, cultures are practices that are embedded in webs of meaning, and really it's through deep encounter that you come to know another universe, almost another world of human habitation, of inner lives of people that are manifest in outer webs of connections. And so it's a neutral statement. It doesn't say X culture is better than Y or X people are better than Y. It says that what is distinguishing is through an inner quality of piety, God consciousness, self-restraint, a certain kind of virtue, a theological virtue of taqwa, or a spiritual virtue. And then in Allah alimun khabir, this is the best. I mean, God is, he has knowledge and he's aware of all things, in that we will develop criteria for judging each other and assessing each other and evaluating X, Y, and Z, but you don't really know. God really knows. And so I think it's an invitation to withhold ultimate judgment on other cultures. And it really coheres with what came right before. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, the verse right before it. Istanibu kathiran min adh-dhann. Like, don't be suspicious of each other. Because we read into things and say, oh, they did this because of that, and you can have su as adhan. It's a terrible thing, like, as opposed to husn adhan. And so if you're going to interpret and have read into things, have a good opinion. Like, oh no, make excuses for each other rather than reading the worst in each other. And so the verse clearly says, avoid suspicion as much as possible. And some suspicion can actually be sinful, where, and don't spy on one another. وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا. And don't speak behind each other's backs.
Mm, mm.
And so, obviously, sometimes it's necessary for the sake of doing good, like to save someone from some machinations, or you have to. But the general guidance here is, just for the sake of gossip and just to talk down to people, and people go around and slandering and backbiting. This is, don't do this, and it then gives this terrible, something that's really an abhorrent kind of
Mm.
example of, would any of you like to eat the flesh of his dead brother? Because they can't talk back, and so it's like you're cannibalizing, your own brother,
Mm.
uh, by engaging in this. It says, no, you would abhor this, but fear Allah. And then even before that, I mean, the verses, La ayyuhalladhina amanu, this is the one right before 11.
Yeah.
La yaskhar qawmun min qawmin, like, don't, some men shouldn't make fun or laugh at other men.
Yeah.
Ridicule. We ridicule each other. Look at them. It's
Oh.
always about, us and them, and us and them.
Yeah.
And the Quran is saying, don't do that. They could be better than you.
Right.
And then, yeah.
Go ahead.
Anyways, go ahead.
No, I'm just, no, you finish, and then I'm just, my mind is immediately going to political commentary. So go ahead. Keep.
Well, it's the same. It's like, qawmun min qawmin, and then nisa'un min nisa'in, and the same for, so it separates out sort of male machinations and gossip from female.
Right.
There are different kinds of perhaps gossips. The women shouldn't do this to other women, because those other women could be better than them.
Right.
And don't defame each other, right? And don't kind of give each other ridiculing kind of nicknames. And you see this all the time on Twitter. I'm thinking of little Marco. What Trump says. I should be careful. But it's become a political culture that
Sleepy Joe. Yeah.
People are always doing this, and it can be very entertaining. Actually, it's a good reminder for me as well, not to follow this stuff, or just definitely not propagate it and not participate in it.
Right.
I mean, we observe it happening, and so these are guidelines. And the verse right before it, innamal mu'minuna ikhwa, like believers are brethren, are but a single brotherhood, and obviously it's gender inclusive.
Yeah.
فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ. And our culture is a culture of making reconciliation,
right,
not sowing division.
Right.
It's fundamental. The foundation of our social culture is to reconcile, and then to have self-restraint, and the same word, wattaqullah. This is the quality that distinguishes one people from another.
Conscious of God.
Some wonderful teaching, and in fact, I'm going to go one more earlier.
Keep going backwards.
We're going backwards. If two parties of believers come to blows, they fight one another,
which is happening.
فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا. The imperative is to make peace between them.
Yes.
It doesn't say, all right, you pick your side and then arm them. The first impulse is one to separate them from fighting and making peace. And so, and this should be the foundation of international relations. But instead, we've got great power rivalries in politics, where it's about sending arms and vanquishing another. There are some, I think, that generally do try to make peace. I feel Oman really tried to make peace, but they didn't have the power to back it up. So,
I think the Sultanate of Oman has, again, this isn't a political podcast, but they have played an excellent role as mediators between different countries, and they've kind of always been a peaceful place where people could gather and talk when the talking was difficult. And so I hope and pray that they can continue performing that role. But it's really interesting because we are we can see even politically right now the extreme hypocrisy of demonizing the other side, as being the evil people and bad people and people who believe in holy war. And yet we see that the people who are engaging, perpetrating the violence even now, are people who have, dozens of rape allegations against them and are known to be profiteering from their political positions and are by no means models of virtue and temperance, and so we have their own version of a divinely ordained mandate to wage war upon other people. So it's really interesting how blind we become when we become preoccupied with dehumanizing the other and slandering the other, and we become morally blind to our own, the evil and the darkness and the extremism within our own camp and within our own ranks. And so just coming back to this idea of that God created us in diversity on purpose in order that we might come to know one another. So what is it, within these, as you said, these webs of meaning and these webs that each of us is part of, what is it that we come to know? When I come to know you and you come to know me, and all of that cultural, and when, in our relationships and our marriages and when we come to know that other person, what are we learning? I feel like it's, I tell my kids, it's like a video game. Like there are secrets, there are keys, these golden keys that we're meant to find in these places and in these people. So what are the golden keys that we find in each other's, as we come to know each other?
I feel you have something in mind. I don't know.
Like coming to know one another is clear, but it almost seems like there's a divine secret waiting for us in fulfilling this divine imperative, coming to know each other. What is it that we come to know?
And it's lita'arafu, almost like so that you may recognize one another.
Yeah.
It's a more intimate knowing, almost like, I can't express it, but maybe I can enact it. Like you go, like you somehow cognitively and mentally, but all intellectually, but also spiritually grasp what is the deep human goodness behind gestures and structures that are maybe slightly distinct from the way you would do it, but are still obviously equally human and therefore one might say equally divine.
Yeah. I have a funny story about this. Maybe it is that we come to see the humanity in the other person. We go, like they're just like me. They're just like us.
Exactly.
A few summers, I can't remember if it's this last summer or the summer before. My mother, everyone knows, I didn't grow up in a Muslim family, and so I'm the only person in my extended family to have embraced Islam, or for Islam to have embraced me, which is really closer to the truth. And so I was home with my parents. My mother was having a little luncheon for the some of her roommates from college, right? And they're, now fairly elderly, ladies in their, probably in their early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And they were eating on the patio of my parents' home. And I was home. So of course, being home, what did I do? Of course, I was like serving them coffee and serving them tea. And one of the ladies asked my mother, she said, so Timothy is a Muslim? And my mom said, yes, he's Muslim. And she said, but he seems so nice, and she was shocked, right? She just, like, she didn't have any way to process the fact that I could be Muslim and like serving them cookies and serving them coffee and tea. And it just like, it was kind of like rocking her mental world. Like how can those things go together? And I think we're all like that a little bit, that we judge other communities, or we judge other people without knowing them. And then once we come to know them, we begin to see ourselves in them, or we see them in us. And then it becomes a completely different experience.
This is a lovely interpretation, I think, that you're offering, لِتَعَارَفُوا, so that you may see each other's humanity. Because, really what causes the root of all these atrocities is dehumanization of the other, where you don't, they're somehow worth less. And here you can see that despite the differences in nations and tribes, or peoples and tribes, that there's a shared humanity. And this is a lovely verse that really opens up that universal, I think, a universal approach to humanity that can guide us today.
Yeah. And you're totally right in pointing out to us that it comes within this context, which is really about peacemaking. It's about not quarreling. It's about finding peace. It's about being merciful to each other, because God is merciful to us. And so we should be merciful to each other.
Yeah. The next verses, the next couple of verses. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
No, please.
They distinguish between this Islam and Iman. So the Bedouin Arabs, قالت الأعراب, the desert Arabs, they say آمنا, we believe. And so now we can start to talk a little bit about the context of this surah. It's towards the late Medinan period, towards the end of his life. And this is the third in a sequence of 3 Medinan surahs. The first is the early Medinan, and then it's kind of mid Medinan, and then it's late Medinan. So this is the third of those in that sequence. So it's towards the end of the Medinan period. And the Prophet has now kind of established himself in the land. And the various tribes are recognizing him and to him and saying that they believe, right? They're giving allegiance to him. And so the Qur'an says, قُلْ لَمْ تُؤْمِنُوا, no, tell them you have no faith. That's the translation I'm looking at. Or you have not yet come to believe, right? وَلَكِنْ قُولُوا أَسْلَمْنَا, don't say آمَنَّا, say أَسْلَمْنَا. So it makes this distinction between these two terms. But just say that we have submitted.
Right.
وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. But this real faith, you're not true believers yet, because the light of faith hasn't fully entered your hearts.
Right.
Although you've outwardly submitted to the Prophet's authority, but your hearts have not yet fully embraced the fire of faith. They've not been kindled yet with the fire of faith. And then it says, وَإِن تُطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ لَا يَلِتْكُم مِّنْ أَعْمَالِكُمْ شَيْئًا. So, but listen, even if this is the case, that you have submitted outwardly, but your hearts are not there yet, so long as you obey God and His Messenger, then your deeds will not go to waste at all.
Right.
In aught. Inna Allah ghafurur rahim. God is forgiving and merciful. And then the next verse says
ahead.
who the real believers are.
Mm.
Innamal mu'minun, the real believers are those, and there's a tautology here. Innamal mu'minun alladhina amanu.
Mm.
The real believers are those who really believe.
Mm.
It's quite a, I enjoy it, because it's really saying what definition can there be
Yeah.
other than just defining it by itself, but really its true expression is in the way it manifests in the world. ثُمَّ لَمْ يَرْتَابُوا, they have no doubts, and then they strive in God's way. They live lives that are testimony to that belief, and that is, living proof of that fire in the heart, is how you orient your life. بِأَمْوَالِهِمْ وَأَنفُسِهِمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. So they give of their lives and their wealth in the path of God.
Yeah.
And they're أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الصَّادِقُونَ.
Saw that.
So they're the ones who, when they say we believe, they really believe. They're true. Their utterance is true.
I almost feel like, this is talking about, of course, the pre-Islamic Arabs who were coming to Islam, and we have this idea of kind of the ideal believer. But do you think this is kind of a spectrum on which we all fall at some place? That we like the sadiqun, like that highest level of people who are all in with their lives, with their wealth, like they're all in. To me, like that's the aspirational goal. And most of us, or I can only speak for myself, I fall somewhere on the spectrum between the people who are still struggling maybe to submit, and with the promise that our deeds will not be in vain, that God will not, disregard the good that we do. But it's almost like it's like a runway, right? We can see what the end of the runway should look like, but many of us fall kind of somewhere toward the beginning or toward the middle as we're working toward that, that state where truly, like, our entire life is lived in a theocentric way, like everything is for God. Every conversation we have, every act we do, our careers, our jobs become expressions of our worship. Everything becomes an opportunity to serve and to worship and to promote that which is good, and to oppose that which is harmful. So I feel like sometimes if we just think about this as the Arabs, then we might be missing something.
No. I think it's just that's the illustration. That's the immediate context. But obviously, I completely agree that it has general, import, and it applies to you and me in just exactly this way. But when you said we talked about this last year, it's a controversial topic, but I love how you just quickly touched upon it, where it said, "Inna khalaqna min dhakarin wa untha." We created you from male and female, and you said these are archetypes, but we are on a spectrum. I've been thinking about this. The whole non-binary and gender fluidity in a way, or not all the way, on one side or the other. There's a lovely there's a dua, prophetic dua, and this is unscripted. Look, this may be completely wrong, and it's a bit risky.
We're really just two bearded guys trying to figure things out. That's all we are.
There's a beautiful dua that you make for the deceased. Allahumma ighfir li hayyina wa mayyitina. Now there, you're either alive or dead.
We have to translate.
Oh,
yes.
Where you seek forgiveness for those who are both living and who have passed away. Right? I mean, you either you're alive or you're dead. I mean, maybe there's, you can look for odd cases where you're in the, part alive, part dead, but that's really not a category. Wa shahidina wa ghaibina. Again, you can't be both present and absent. So may God forgive those who are present and who are absent. So these are absolute categories. They're not, spectrums. But then you have wasaghirina wa kabirina. So you've got the spectrum. And the young and the old, but you have those who are, middle-aged.
Yes.
and moving on this. And so, and then wazakarina wa unthana. And so it could be the male and the female. And so it could be that the first two are like the absolute categories, and the second two are more, the ends of a pole. Wallahu a'lam. I think, biologically we know. And so I think we should have more expansive interpretations. And that, look, science is fallible, it's socially constructed, all of that. But it does have great power as well, and some explanatory power. And there's some, you have to take it seriously. And so, and then obviously people's own experiences and testimony. But go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, but the key we come back to is the li ta'arafu, in order that you might come to know each other, And so let's take a binary person and a non-binary person. This is still two incredibly complex human beings that when they come to know each other, they come to see one another's humanity, And so
yes.
I really see that the key to this puzzle of diversity. It's not a threat of diversity. It's not a problem of diversity. It's the gift of diversity. The key is always coming to know each other, coming to know you. And so when you come to me and you present differently than what I'm used to, I should not respond negatively. I should ask questions. I should be curious. Oh, like, how does that work for you? And what does that mean to you? And we should become, curious about each other, as opposed to slapping judgments upon each other without knowledge. This is, to me, the key. And so I'm totally okay that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God in his wisdom and mercy and power, has created diversity for our benefit and for our education and for our enlightenment. And so I'm not at war with diversity. I should be, every time diversity presents itself to me, something different, something I've never experienced before, before I judge, I should be curious. And this is, again, this comes back to education. It's like the idea of having an inquisitive mind, being a lifelong learner, having a spirit of, there was an old Zen book I remember reading called Beginner's Mind. It was about always approaching something like you're a beginner. Even if you're a Zen master, even if you're a Kung Fu master, you still approach everything like with a beginner's mind. And I feel like this is kind of what the Qur'an is advocating, that we live in a state of wonder and curiosity, and before we judge, we seek to understand and come to know.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I that's one thing I fully live up to, is the beginner's mind, especially when I'm teaching, because every time I go into class, I feel like I don't know anything and I have to learn it all over again before I walk in. That never ends. But I'm mindful we have about 10 minutes. I want to expand out, if it's okay with you, into this sequence of 3 surahs. The first one is Surah 47, the 3 Medinan surahs that come between 2 other groups of Meccan surahs. Surah Muhammad, also known as Surah Tal. This is surah number 47. And then Surah Al-Fath, which is surah number 48. And then Surah Al-Hujurat, which we were reading from right now, 49. Right. So if you go to 47, in the second ayah, one of the names of the surah is Muhammad, and the name Muhammad is mentioned, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the second verse. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. So it begins with الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. This is an interesting beginning also. Like, the surah, I don't think any other surah begins الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, like those who disbelieve. So, and this is also in the early Medinan period.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We should interrogate that, how we translate that. But why don't you read, both, set them up and then read both of these verses together, inshallah.
Yeah, so it begins in this way, and the way I read this, I mean, they're critical, historians and revisionist historians who separate the seerah from the Qur'an, but if we read them together as the tradition has,
the seerah meaning the biography of the Prophet,
the biography of the Prophet.
Yes.
Then in the Meccan period, the Prophet and his companions, they were persecuted, and they were completely non-violent. They preached, and they emigrated even early on to Abyssinia to escape persecution, and they never retaliated, right? But then in the Medinan period, after migrating to Medina, where the Prophet organized the community, then they engaged in armed conflict, in raids and battles under the banner of the Prophet. And so this surah is the one where the permission is given to fight. And we'll see this later on. It's verse number, I believe, verse number 20. But so that's just, for those who are reading the Qur'an, to kind of try to understand the context a little bit within the Prophet's life. And in ayah number 1, it begins this surah 47, الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا وَصَدُّوا عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. So it's addressing, those who reject. This is how it's translated here: those who reject God, or it can be read as who are ungrateful, or who cover up the truth. And sometimes it's just translated as who've just disbelieved, which is the istalahi meaning in mostly in legal discourse, the non-Muslims who in the presence of the Prophet rejected him, which is different from those who do that today, because they encounter the messages completely differently than you would in the actual presence of the messenger. So it says those who reject, or who disbelieve, or who cover up, or are ungrateful, and who lead and hinder other people from the way of God, أَضَلَّ أَعْمَالَهُمْ. So their deeds are rendered astray, or their deeds don't hit the mark, right? They kind of wasted. And then as opposed to them, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, those who have believed, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, and do righteous deeds, وَآمَنُوا بِمَا نُزِّلَ عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ. So this is one of 4 places in the Quran where Muhammad is named by name. And it's all of these 4 places are in the Medinan Quran. So the first reference we saw was in Ali Imran, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ.
That's right.
Where it highlights his prophethood, his being a messenger, Rasul, and his humanity.
Right.
وَقَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ, and his historical, his historicity, like messengers have come before him, and were he to die or to be slain in battle. That's the context. And this is the second place where you have it. No, the second one comes in Surat Ahzab. مَا كَانَ مُحَمَّدٌ أَبَا أَحَدٍ مِّن رِجَالِكُمْ. Like, that's Muhammad is not the father of any of your men. And it deals with inheritance and succession of the Prophet. And the third is this reference here, where it speaks in the context of what is sent down to him. بِمَا نُزِّلَ ala Muhammad wa huwa al-haqqu min rabbihim, and this is the truth from his Lord. And the fourth occurrence of this actually occurs in the very next surah, Surah Al-Fath. Muhammadur Rasulullah walladhina ma'ahu. So it speaks about Muhammad and his companions who are together in the struggle against those who are opposing them. And that's the next surah. And then there's a fifth mention which comes in Surah As-Saf, which is also a Medinan surah, surah number 61, where it actually mentions the Prophet Muhammad as a messenger who's been foretold in previous scriptures. And there, what's interesting is he's mentioned by a variant of Muhammad, his name, as he's mentioned as Ahmad. And so, which is, I think, a really fantastic allusion to how, scriptures can have variants, and you will find references in different modes, and perhaps with different even words or names, referring to the same thing. So that's that's the context of these surahs. And if you look at verse number 20, where it says, وَيَقُولُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَوْلَا نُزِّلَتْ سُورَةٌ. So those who believe, they say, why isn't a surah sent down for us? And we understand from this a surah that commands them to now engage the enemy, physically, like an armed battle, because previously they had been told to tie their hands, kufu aydiyakum, and that was the practice. And so it says, فَإِذَا أُنزِلَتْ سُورَةٌ مُحْكَمَةٌ وَذُكِرَ فِيهَا الْقِتَالِ. So actually, when the surah comes down and it mentions fighting, رَأَيْتَ الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَيْكَ نَظَرَ الْمَغْشِيِّ عَلَيْهِ مِنَ الْمَوْتِ. So this kind of, people who, even though they believe but they were weak, they find this to be something that is heavy, or in whose hearts rather was a disease. Like they find it heavy. So this is a tough, a sequence here that has to be, I think, deeply contextualized in the life of the Prophet. But it's there, and it continues to serve as a guide. Yep.
I just want to supplement that we talk a lot in Quranic studies about interpreting the Qur'an with the Qur'an, and my understanding is that while there are many references to fighting in the Qur'an, the kind of the foundation for the Quranic idea of just war, and it's I guess we live in a world where there is lots of fighting. And so and the Quran doesn't deny the fact that violence is part of human life. But I think this passage from Surah Al-Hajj, which is sometimes taken to be the very first permission given to the newly formed community in Medina to fight, is instructive. And I think it's actually in a way a kind of comforting passage to read, because it grounds fighting within a context of peace and godliness. So I'm looking at Surah 22, Ayah 39 and following. Are you okay if we go back and kind of close?
I'm there.
Okay.
Sure.
So I'm just reading the English translation for time, but to those against whom war has already been waged, permission that is given to fight, because they have been wronged. And verily, God is the most powerful in their aid. These are the ones who have been expelled from their homes in defiance of any just cause or right, for no reason except that they say that our Lord is Allah, meaning that our Lord is God. Had not God checked one set of people by means of another, surely there would have been pulled down monasteries and churches, synagogues and mosques, places in which the name of God is commemorated in abundant measure. Surely God will aid those who aid his cause, for verily God is full of strength, exalted in might. So these are the ones who, again, these are the ones who have been given permission to fight. These are the ones who, if we establish them in the land, they establish regular prayer, and they give charity, and they command what is right and wholesome, and they forbid what is wrong. And with God rests the end of all affairs. And so I see this as a not a celebration of war, but as a recognition of the fact that life on planet Earth is so messed up that there are times when evil has to be checked. And if evil is not checked, if evil is not opposed, then synagogues and churches and monasteries and places where God's name is celebrated, that these sacred places will be defiled, not to mention human beings being defiled. And so, and the purpose of fighting is not its own thing. So there's nothing holy about fighting. There's nothing holy about war. But the purpose of fighting is in order to get to a place where there's calm, there's religious freedom, where people can pray and people can give charity and people can make laws that encourage what is good and wholesome, and laws that forbid what is harmful. And so the goal of fighting here is the establishment of a just society, and there's nothing glorious about it. There's nothing celebrated about it. There's nothing holy about fighting, other than the fact that the Quran acknowledges that the world is so broken and so fallen that there are times when fighting becomes necessary. And again, I know that we have pacifist theologians within the Muslim community, and there's a whole diversity of opinion about this. But I find this passage to be very comforting in a way, because it's not a celebration of fighting. It's a
that's
recognition
beautiful.
that sometimes sometimes force is necessary to repel or to prevent worse evil from taking place.
No, thank you for pointing us to the very important section in Surah Al-Hajj. And I'm reminded also, as we discuss this, or maybe one more before we close. This is in Surah Al-Anfal, Surah number 8. So we're going further back. And I want to say, I hate to put it this way, because this is being used, today in ways that we don't really think is good and proper. But it's almost like peace through strength doctrine that I'm seeing. And I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Look at Surah number 8, verse number 60. And prepare for them, verse number 60. And prepare for them what you can of strength of arms, and horses tethered for battle, frightening thereby the enemy of God and your enemy, and others besides them who you know not. God knows them. Whatsoever you spend in the way of God shall be paid unto you in full, and you shall not be wronged.
Keep
and
going.
Then the next verse is just absolutely, I know. And if they incline toward peace, incline thou toward it, and trust in God. Truly he is the hearing and the knowing. And so the idea is not to engage in violence for violence sake, but or to prepare even, but to have it as a deterrence, and always to seek peace. And we should also mention that the tradition is extremely rich, and all of these, we're reading the Qur'an, but the jurisprudential tradition has developed a rich texture of interpretation around the idea of, putting all of these verses together, contextualizing them, and the idea of, just war, rules in war, and so very much things that are coherent with what we would consider humanitarian law or international law, and that's very much part of what becomes the Sharia, and the Sharia has in fact influenced a lot of that as well in history. So,
and we know that the Prophet, upon him be peace, explicitly forbade, like, the killing of elderly people, the killing of women, the attacking of women, the salting of fields, and the destruction of the environment, even the harming of animals in a context of battle. And so I wonder, and I often wonder about this, whether modern warfare itself, by definition, should be deemed forbidden in within an Islamic spiritual framework, just because, and even legal framework, because modern warfare, by definition, breaks all of those rules, right? It's with the indiscriminate, these massive industrialized weapons of war, innocent people are going to die. The environment is going to be trashed. We see the acid rain that's falling now over Tehran. The oil,
right.
the black clouds, and the acidic rain that's coming down and poisoning people's lungs, and so we're that in modern industrial warfare, it almost breaks all of the traditional rules that govern ethical waging of war, and certainly in our most recent example, what we're witnessing, that this idea of, if your enemy inclines toward peace, then you incline toward peace, which means that if your enemy is sitting at the negotiating table talking to you, you shouldn't be attacking their country behind their back, right? You shouldn't be preparing
or
bomb them.
Or bombing the
Yes.
negotiating. And this is what you're saying. I mean, this is part of both Catholic social teaching and just war. I mean, there are theorists now, and I think even from the magisterium, that maybe a just war is no longer possible today, precisely because of these weapons that we have. And this was the reason why the Ayatollah had that fatwa that you can't have nuclear weapons because of its indiscriminate kind of mass destruction. For what it's worth, I mean, I tend to believe in those principles. I think we should take them more seriously, and there's certainly warrant for them in our traditions. And in some ways, maybe it's our absence, the lack of our respect for these traditions, rather than these traditions themselves, that create so much chaos in the world.
Yeah. I could, Mahan, I enjoy these evenings with you so much. I could go on for hours, but I'm sure that there are many people that are waiting for us to finish. So, why don't you close us out as you typically do, and we'll pray for a world that inclines toward peace, inshallah.
Ameen, ameen. And then you translate. You do it so beautifully. So I think that's a good coupling we have.
Okay.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم في خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر صدق الله العظيم.
In the name of God, who is the loving nurturer of the creation and the all-compassionate, surely humanity is in a state of loss. By the setting sun, by the waning afternoon, surely humankind is in a state of loss, except for those who believe and who live righteously and perform beautiful deeds, and who encourage one another in the truth, and who encourage one another to be patient and to persevere. So let us be among those who encourage one another in truth and in patience, and let us be among those who incline toward peace in this very disturbing and painful moment that we find ourselves in as a human family. Thank you, Dr. Mahan, for being such a wonderful companion on this journey, and we will look forward, inshallah, to one final Ramadan Unscripted on Wednesday night, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Okay, God bless you. God bless everyone who's there with us. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.